This is Gaia Lamperti. I am IBSi Intelligence Reporter, and today we are joined by Matthijs Eijpe, Regional Vice President EMEA at Backbase, a software company empowering banks and other financial institutions to accelerate their digital transformation. Hello, Matthijs.
Pleasure to be here today. Thank you for joining, and looking forward to the interview.
Thank you. Thank you for your time. And we are very enthusiastic about the fact that Backbase is expanding and it's increasingly growing its role in the Middle Eastern region. So before we start discussing about that and the recent changes happening in that geography, why, Matthijs, don't you offer us an introduction on Backbase, the company's work, and the increasingly important role it's playing in the Middle Eastern region?
Yeah, sure, no problem. So Backbase is a originally Dutch software company, so still headquartered today from Amsterdam, the Netherlands. And we are a company that focuses on digital transformation in the banking industry. And what we bring to market is what we call the Engagement Banking Platform. So essentially a platform that allows any bank, whether that's an established bank in a particular market, or perhaps a neobank, or perhaps a specialized fintech, to manage all the customer engagements you may see in a typical, let's say, customer journey or the life of a customer. So really helping customers in key moments of their life with the right financial advice in order to help them forward with that specific moment. So the Backbase platform is everything around becoming a customer of a bank. Once you obviously as a customer want to be able to self-service, perhaps at a certain moment in time when you get married or when you buy a house, you want to be able to get a mortgage. And also, if needed, you want to speak to a person to get the right financial advice at a certain moment in time. So basically, that whole customer life cycle, the relationship a person or a company will have with a bank is being powered by the Backbase platform. And we do that globally. We are recognized in a leader in this space by the major analysts, Forrester, Gartner, and the likes. And what is perhaps different compared to some of the other, let's say, players in the field, is that we really focus. So we really focus solely on this single platform. So let's say all the investments we do in our people, in our product, in our brand, is really focusing on this engagement banking platform. And I think having focus and purpose is a strong differentiator. And therefore also we are, as a company, having good momentum both globally, but also specifically in the GCC, resulting recently in opening offices in, let's say, Riyadh as one of the larger, let's say, countries where a lot of, let's say, financial tech or banking specific innovations are happening. So we see a strong momentum in the Middle East for, let's say, the digital banking demand. I hope that helps.
Absolutely. Great overview. And I think it's so interesting. So when did you initially identify this opportunity, this probably gap in the market in the region? And what are some of the trends that favored the growth we're witnessing in the Middle East in digital banking?
Yeah, I think there's a few elements here. So I think the first element is a more natural one when it comes to evolution of, let's say, people and technology, right? I think a couple of years ago or decades ago, there was no digital. So hence everything was more from a physical interaction point. You would visit a branch or you would visit a physical location to make use of the banking services. Obviously, as time has passed, everything is today digital. So the customer expectation in itself from the bank they deal with is that everything happens on a digital device, preferably mobile. So I think that more evolutionary journey, I think, is a generic one that has resulted, I think, in a lot of momentum for players like Backbase. I think a second one, which is more specific in the recent, let's say, 24 months, is obviously COVID. As a result of COVID, physical interactions were not necessarily possible, at least not all the time. So therefore, the banks had even more urgency to really digitize all their different operations at a more aggressive speed. Hence, it also contributed to the momentum, I think, of the fintech space in general in the GCC, and also more specifically to Backbase. And I think thirdly, in the GCC, and particularly in a few countries, you see a very young demographic population. And that population is obviously accustomed to larger platforms, whether that's for looking at series or whether that's for ordering food. And they typically expect that same level of customer experience from their bank. So therefore, you also see a lot of the banks investing heavily in the digital space to attract, let's say, the younger generation of people so that they have a more future-proof, viable business model. I think those three, what I would say, are some of the larger contributors to the momentum in the GCC specifically, or in the Middle East.
Great point.
I hope that helps.
Yeah, absolutely. And specifically, you mentioned the pandemic. Clearly, that has been a global change, and so many banks have really interpreted that moment as a pivotal change. So more specifically, in the GCC countries, what have been the impacts and some of the changes caused by the COVID disruption in the banking ecosystem?
Yeah, I think it's a combination of things. I think one, you see on the regulatory side that the respective central, let's say, banks or the regulators have started to push new regulation that will make it more easy for players like us or others to enter the market in the first place. If you look at typical customer journeys, typically you would still see a physical interaction moment in certain markets, to sign a document or perhaps a formal piece of paper. And you see definitely that the market is moving more to digitizing also those parts of a customer journey in order to make the full life cycle, let's say, digital. So I think that's mostly on the regulatory front. I think at the board level itself, you clearly see that the investment portfolio, or let's say the strategic plan, is more and more one that is really focusing on digital, right? Typically before COVID, you might still have seen a portfolio that was more distributed in terms of digital versus physical, but you see really a shift there in changing from how they manage, let's say, their top line, how they manage their bottom line, how they set KPIs at a company level, and how they then translate into digital KPIs, and how they then translate into individual KPIs. So I think throughout the whole value chain, you see a clear, let's say, push to let's say, digital that is partly driven by the result of the pandemic.
Absolutely.
I hope that clarifies.
Very interesting. And what would you say are some of the verticals? You mentioned a couple, but maybe with some examples, and then country by country. I imagine there are some local differences and trends. Some of the verticals that have been driving innovation in the space.
Yeah, I think obviously from the most, let's say, services every consumer uses today, right, which is either transportation or food delivery. There's obviously global players, but interestingly, not all of those have succeeded in some of the larger Middle Eastern markets. So there you see the local, let's say, equivalent really getting momentum and therefore driving the innovation. On the payments side, you see quite a lot of innovation happening. Obviously, the GCC is also characterized by a lot of expats, people that send money abroad. So there also on the payments space, you see a lot of good innovation happening. And also in the telco space, especially in certain markets, you see that telcos are trying to do the crossover into banking to benefit also some of the innovations that probably have happened a bit earlier in telco versus banking, you know, around pricing, around product packaging, around how they interface with a customer. So I think also on the telco space, you see a good movement. I think STC probably being the key example here, in the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia. That is also then rocking a little bit the foundation of the banking industry. So I think it's a mix of those three primarily.
Fantastic. And I'm glad you just mentioned Saudi Arabia, because I know that Backbase just, when was it, last week, signed off the first deal with a Saudi Arabian bank, Banque Saudi-Fransi. So yeah, this is a space growing very quickly in Saudi. Digital banks are the next big thing in the country. So maybe, Matthijs, would you like to tell us a bit more about this new partnership and what's behind the general growth in the country, in the kingdom?
Yeah, so I think in the kingdom, out of all countries in the Middle East, it's probably where you see most momentum. That is partly driven, obviously, by the government pushing the 2030 vision, which has a number of larger pillars in which investments are being made, obviously the financial service industry being one of those. So clearly you see the government and therefore also the regulator really pushing the needle in terms of innovation, whether that's open banking, whether that's on payments, whether that's on issuing new banking licenses, of which the previous example, STC, is one of them. So there you see a lot of movement from, let's say, the highest level within the country, which then also translates favorably to us, because obviously the established banking, let's say, sector has to also then get ready, right, for all these new innovations that are coming to the market. And then specifically for BSF, it resulted in a partnership where we will basically help BSF to meet, let's say, all the movements that are entering into the market, to make sure that they keep their competitive position as an established digital player, and to really future-proof their architecture in a fully what we call digital-first, mobile-first based servicing model. So we really will help the bank to future-proof their architecture, the way they operate, to ensure that it aligns to the 2030 vision, and that they're ready, let's say, to capture even more market share than they have done so today.
Sure, makes a lot of sense. And we mentioned a few words like innovation, digital, all these elements usually are associated with a higher level of accessibility to the market, more inclusion, and making sure that more players can play an active role in the ecosystem. So tapping into Backbase experience in the region, how is this change happening in the Middle East, and how are your partners and clients favoring a more inclusive market in the region?
Yeah, so you see basically from the regulatory standpoint, again, very good initiatives to ensure that financial products, financial services become more accessible. There's a big movement around what is called open banking typically. You have it in Europe, you have it in the US, but basically opening up what used to be a more closed system to, let's say, more nimble players, so that they can also be competitive and maybe focus on areas where the bank in the past may not necessarily have put sufficient attention, and to really optimize the servicing model. And they then have the opportunity to step in because, you know, the infrastructure, the regulatory framework allows for it. And there's different areas, right? It can be in the payment space. It can be how SMEs are serviced. It can be in the area of how blue-collar laborers are being serviced, right? By creating simple wallets that make it easy for them to get money, but also transfer that, let's say, to relatives and so forth. So I think that whole movement of making it inclusive for both, let's say, smaller players, fintechs, and therefore, as a result, also the final consumer, I think are basically the biggest contributor to this more inclusive, let's say, movement. What you then also see on the partner ecosystem side in Backbase is that we also team up with, let's say, local players that complement the Backbase platform. So typically what you see there is what is called as banking as a service, or let's say complementary systems to something like us, in order to create the complete landscape for either a digital bank or perhaps an established bank, which in the end should also reduce then the friction to implement, right? Typically what you see is that setting up a bank is not easy. So obviously you need technology for that. Modern technology that is ideally pre-integrated, cloud-based, open, but then also having access to the right talent pool. So it's basically bringing those elements together in order to be successful in the Middle East. And yeah, Backbase is one of those ingredients to make the financial system more inclusive.
Absolutely. And I find it so fascinating what you just said about finding the right talent locally with the local knowledge and, that collaborative approach that can build up towards better solutions and better applications of the products. Fantastic. Thank you, Matthijs. And before we conclude, let's maybe talk about the future. So we spoke about the pandemic, new customers' expectations, particularly with younger generations adopting more and more the digital economy. So what can we expect when now we reach a new normal, hopefully in the post-pandemic, from the digital banking ecosystem? What are going to be the trends that shape that future? And maybe how is Backbase working towards that new normal?
Yeah, I think it's a couple of larger streams. Obviously, the use of more decentralized finance, let's say structures, typically known as crypto, right, in the consumer mind. But there you see a lot of movement. So basically, whether that's on a national level, right, creating a digital currency at a national level, or perhaps more, let's say, smaller initiative, obviously Binance, but also crypto recently established in Bahrain. So you see a lot of that movement within that particular space. I think you see also a lot of innovation happening in the know your customer space, so making that fully digital. Some markets in the GCC are already a bit more mature than others, but I think that's a larger movement that is happening currently. Also, you see companies started to experiment with, the more virtual metaverse type of propositions, right? NFTs is a big thing these days. So you also see a lot of these banks testing the waters. We're not going to be exactly sure what is successful, right? What is scalable, what will contribute to the top line and to the balance sheet. But you do see a lot of these incubation vehicles in the market to at least test recipes, right? And then look at what recipe is successful for a particular market segment. I think those would be the larger areas where you see real innovation happening. But in all fairness, that will also take some years to really mature, right? I think there's also a lot of basics in certain markets, especially to solve first for. And once you have the basics in place, you can really start to focus on the next frontier in terms of digital innovation. So that's what I would at least see currently within the Middle Eastern market.
Absolutely. Well, definitely exciting times. It sounds like there's a lot we should expect. And thank you so much for your insights. Matthijs Eijpe, Regional Vice President EMEA at Backbase. Thank you so much for your time and your contribution.
Thank you for the opportunity. And we look forward to having more interactions in the Middle East. And again, if you want to connect to us, I hope you know where to find us.
Definitely. Thank you.
Thank you.